7 years of love shattered in minutes when she saw the betrayal in the storage room. That afternoon, alone, she locked the lovers in the dark and called the other betrayed spouse to see the truth. From trauma, strength was born, and from the end, she made a new beginning. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. Let's continue. Claire always believed she knew her life by heart. Every detail was in its right place, like the architectural plans she drew every day in her office in Denver's Cherry Creek neighborhood. The lines were precise, the spaces calculated, the foundations solid. Her life followed the same principle. At 32, she had built something she considered unshakable. A 7-year marriage to Brian, a man she'd met in college who seemed to be the natural extension of who she was. A spacious condo in Capitol Hill with a balcony overlooking the Rocky Mountains. A rising career with residential projects that were starting to get noticed in the local market. And Megan, her younger sister, 3 years her junior, who was more than just family. She was her partner in crime, her confidant, the person who understood her inside jokes and shared childhood memories from their parents' house in the Washington Park neighborhood. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be, until the cracks started to appear. But Claire didn't know that yet. On that April morning, as the city woke up under the clear blue sky typical of a Colorado spring, she was sitting in the kitchen, her hands trembling around a small white plastic object. 2 pink lines. 2 lines that changed everything, 2 lines she had been waiting to see for 2 whole years. She was pregnant. The home pregnancy test seemed too small to carry so much meaning. Claire held it up to the window light, as if she needed additional confirmation, as if the lines might disappear if she blinked. But they remained there, firm, undeniable. Her heart was beating so fast she had to sit down again. Brian was still asleep in the bedroom. She wanted to wake him up, run in there and shout the news, but something made her pause. Maybe it was the fear that this wasn't real. Maybe it was the memory of the previous months, the failed attempts, the hormone tests, the appointments with her gynecologist that always ended with the same tired phrase. Patience, keep trying. This is more common than you think. But now it was here, happening, real. Claire left the test on the kitchen counter and walked out to the balcony. Denver stretched out before her, the street still empty on that Saturday morning, the distant sound of a car passing on Spear Boulevard. She placed a hand on her belly, still flat, still without visible signs. But something was growing in there, a life, a piece of her and Brian. The emotion rose in her throat, and she felt her eyes well up. How many times had she imagined this moment? How many nights had she spent awake, thinking of names, of what it would be like to hold her child in her arms, of what it would be like to see Brian become a father? She went back inside and picked up her phone. She wanted to call Megan. She wanted to tell someone. But she decided to wait. First, Brian needed to know. Then, her sister. Megan would be as happy as she was. After all, the 2 of them shared everything. Ever since they were little, living in their parents' house and sharing a lavender-painted bedroom, they had been inseparable. Megan had been her maid of honor. Claire had been a witness at her sister's wedding to Phil, a civil engineer who worked on highway projects and was constantly traveling through rural Colorado. The 4 of them formed a tight-knit group. Weekly dinners, weekend outings to the Denver Botanic Gardens, family parties where Brian and Phil would talk about football, while she and Megan laughed at some private joke no one else understood. That was the life Claire knew. Solid, secure, predictable. Brian woke up a little after 9. Claire heard his footsteps in the hallway, the sound of the toilet flushing, the water from the faucet. He walked into the kitchen, yawning, in shorts and a wrinkled t-shirt, his brown hair disheveled. He still had that slightly clumsy way of someone who had just woken up, but Claire found it charming. She always had. He opened the fridge, got the orange juice, and poured himself a glass without looking in her direction. Claire took a deep breath. Now. Brian, I need to show you something. He turned, still holding the glass. What is it? She pointed to the counter where the test lay. Brian frowned, confused, and took a few steps in that direction. He picked up the object, studied it for a few seconds. His expression changed. His eyes widened. He looked up, staring at Claire as if he needed confirmation. "Is this—" "It is," she answered, feeling the tears return. "I took the test this morning. I'm pregnant, Brian." He stood there, paralyzed, just looking at her. Then slowly a smile began to form on his face, a smile that grew until it became something bigger, almost incredulous. He set the glass down on the table, crossed the kitchen in 3 long strides, and hugged her with so much force that Claire felt the air leave her lungs. She laughed, hugging him back, smelling the scent of sleep and cologne that still clung to his skin. "Seriously?" he asked, still holding her. "For real?" "For real." Brian let her go, but kept his hands on her shoulders, looking into her eyes. There was something different in his gaze, a mix of joy, surprise, and something Claire couldn't quite identify. Maybe it was just shock after all. They had been waiting for this for so long that maybe Brian, like her, had started to doubt it would ever really happen. "I can't believe it," he said, running a hand over his face. "I really can't believe it. After everything, I know." Claire smiled, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "I can't believe it either." They stood there, just looking at each other, until Brian pulled her into another hug. This one was longer, quieter. Claire closed her eyes and allowed herself to feel that moment. Everything was finally happening, everything was falling into place, or so she thought. The following days were a mix of contained euphoria and secret planning. Claire scheduled an appointment with her gynecologist for the next week, but decided not to tell anyone else yet. It was too early, just the first trimester. It was better to wait, to make sure everything was okay, that the baby was developing. Brian agreed, though he seemed ready to burst with the desire to shout the news to the whole world. He became more affectionate, more present, always asking if she was feeling well, if she needed anything, if she was eating right. Claire found this comforting. Brian had always been attentive, but now there was an extra layer of care, as if he were finally stepping into the role of a future father. She found herself imagining what it would be like, a boy or a girl. Would they have her brown eyes or Brian's light green ones? Would they like architecture or follow a completely different path? At night, before falling asleep, she would place her hand on her belly and mentally talk to the little life that was beginning to grow. "Hi, little one," or "little girl, I don't know who," or "You are yet, but I already love you so much." It was Megan who first noticed something was different. On a Thursday night, the two met for dinner at a restaurant in the Highlands, a small, cozy place that served classic American comfort food. Claire ordered roasted chicken with mashed potatoes, but when the plate arrived, the strong smell made her feel slightly nauseous. She pushed the plate away discreetly, trying to hide it. Megan, sitting across the table, noticed immediately. "Are you okay?" her sister asked, leaning forward. "You look pale." "I'm fine," Claire forced a smile. "Just tired. Work has been crazy." Megan studied her for a few seconds, those brown eyes identical to her own scanning her face for clues. The two were physically similar. Same height, same bone structure, the same straight brown hair that fell over their shoulders. But Megan had a younger, more carefree air about her. She worked as a graphic designer and lived life with a lightness that Claire sometimes envied. "Are you sure?" Megan insisted. "You seem different." Claire's heart sped up. She wanted to tell her, she wanted to share this with her sister, but it was still too early, still too risky. So she changed the subject, asking about Megan's work, about Phil, about anything that would take the focus off her. Megan accepted the change of subject, but Claire noticed her sister continued to watch her closely. When they said goodbye in the parking lot, Megan hugged her tighter than usual. "Anything, just call me, okay?" her sister said. "For anything at all." Claire promised she would, and got in her car, feeling a strange tightness in her chest. Maybe it was just paranoia. Maybe it was the hormones which the doctor had said would make everything more sensitive. But as she drove home, she couldn't stop thinking about Megan's worried expression. The doctor's appointment confirmed what the test had already shown. Claire was 5 weeks pregnant. The baby was the size of a sesame seed, but the heartbeat could already be detected on the ultrasound. She heard that sound for the first time and burst into tears right there on the exam table, with the cold gel still on her belly and the doctor smiling beside her. Brian held her hand, also emotional, his eyes shining in a way Claire hadn't seen since their wedding day. "Everything looks good," the doctor said, printing out the ultrasound images. "Heartbeat is strong, everything is as expected, congratulations." Claire treasured those images as if they were rare jewels. On the way home, she and Brian talked about when they would finally tell their families. Maybe after the first trimester, maybe at Sunday lunch at her parents' house. It would be a surprise. Everyone would be happy, especially Megan. But then the signs started. Subtle at first, so subtle that Claire thought she was imagining things. Megan started showing up more often, sometimes without calling, ringing the doorbell in the middle of the afternoon with the excuse that she was in the neighborhood and decided to stop by. She brought things, warm bagels from the bakery, a book she thought Claire would like. Once she brought flowers, saying she saw them at the market and thought of her sister. Claire found this strange but at the same time comforting. Maybe Megan sensed somehow that something special was happening. Maybe it was that sisterly connection, that instinct they always had of knowing when the other needed company. But there was something more. Brian started working from home more frequently. He said he was stressed at the office, that he needed a quieter environment to concentrate. He set up his laptop on the desk in the guest room, the one at the back of the condo, far from the living room where Claire usually worked on her own projects. She found this reasonable. After all, Brian was a sales manager for a tech company and really did spend long hours on the phone, closing deals, solving problems. What she started to find less reasonable were the coincidences. Megan would show up. Brian would be home. Megan would leave. Half an hour later, Brian would have to go out to run an errand, buy something, pick up documents, any excuse, and he would take a long time, sometimes hours. When he came back, he seemed more relaxed, less tense. Claire tried to ignore it. She was pregnant. She was sensitive. Hormones played tricks on your mind. The doctor had warned her about it. Mood swings, mild paranoia, a feeling that everything was different. It was normal. It was part of the process. But Claire's intuition, that quiet voice in the back of her mind, was starting to scream. One Saturday afternoon, while Brian was supposedly at the grocery store, Claire decided to organize the bedroom closet. She was arranging winter clothes when she found something that had fallen behind a pile of his t-shirts. An earring. Small, delicate, silver. She picked it up and recognized it immediately. It was Megan's. She had seen her sister wear that earring several times. Claire's heart pounded. She held the object in her palm, looking at it as if it were a bomb about to explode. There had to be an explanation. There had to be. Megan came to the condo often. Maybe she had helped organize something. Maybe the earring had fallen off and gotten stuck on Brian's clothes somehow. But why was it in the closet? Inside. The closet. Not on the floor. Not in the living room. Inside Brian's closet. She went down to the garage, still holding the earring, and waited for Brian to arrive. When he parked the car and got out carrying grocery bags, she was leaning against the wall, her arms crossed. He saw her and smiled. "Hey, honey, I bought those ginger snaps you like." Claire held up her hand, showing him the earring. "This is Megan's." Brian stopped. He looked at the object, then at her. "And?" "I found it in your closet." He shrugged with a casualness that seemed excessive. "She must have lost it when she came over to help you with the baby stuff last week. Remember, you two spent the whole afternoon reorganizing that room we were going to turn into an office." Claire remembered. But it didn't make sense. Why would the earring be in Brian's closet, and not on the floor of the room they had organized? Brian noticed her hesitation. He picked up the bags and started walking toward the elevator. "Honey, you're getting really paranoid. The hormones, you know. Megan is here all the time. It's normal for her to leave something behind." Claire didn't answer. She just followed him to the condo, still holding the earring as if it contained some hidden answer. Brian put away the groceries, made coffee, and acted as if nothing had happened. And maybe nothing had happened. Maybe she was overreacting. Maybe the pregnancy was messing with her head in a way she couldn't control. But that night, lying in bed next to Brian, who was snoring lightly with his face turned away, Claire couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, feeling the baby inside her, still too small to move but present somehow, a life that depended completely on her. And for the first time since she saw the 2 lines on the pregnancy test, Claire felt afraid. Not afraid of childbirth, not afraid of being a mother, but afraid that something in her life, something she considered solid and unshakable, was starting to crumble. And the worst part was, she didn't know how to stop it. Or if she even wanted to know the truth, because some truths, Claire was beginning to realize, could destroy everything. Sundays had always been sacred in Claire's family. Ever since she and Megan were little, Sunday lunch at their parents' house was a non-negotiable tradition. Her mum, Celia, would cook from early in the morning, preparing those hearty, generous dishes that filled the house with a wonderful aroma. Roasted chicken, baked beans, collard greens, fluffy white rice. Her dad, Walter, would be on the patio manning the grill, sipping a cold beer while listening to country music on the old radio he refused to replace. On that particular Sunday, 2 weeks after the earring incident, Claire and Brian arrived at the house in Washington Park shortly after noon. Megan and Phil were already there, sitting at the patio table, chatting with her parents. When Claire walked in, Megan immediately stood up and came to hug her. "Hey sis, how are you?" Claire returned the hug, but something in her tensed up. Since the earring incident, she couldn't look at her sister the same way. Every gesture, every word, every smile seemed to carry a hidden meaning. It was as if she was seeing Megan through a new filter, searching for signs, looking for confirmation of a suspicion she still didn't want to admit. "I'm good. Just working a lot." Megan pulled away, but kept her hands on Claire's shoulders, studying her face. "You look different, prettier. You have a new glow." Claire forced a smile. "Must be the new moisturizer I started using." Brian had already joined the men on the patio. Claire watched him from a distance, talking with Phil and her dad, laughing at some joke Walter was telling with his typical animated flair. Brian seemed completely at ease. No sign of guilt, no tension, nothing. Maybe she really was imagining everything. Lunch was served, and everyone sat around the large wooden table on the patio. Celia brought out the serving dishes one by one, proud, insisting that everyone eat plenty. Claire took small portions, still fighting the morning sickness that sometimes lingered into the afternoon. Megan, sitting next to her, noticed. "You're barely eating. Are you on a diet?" "No, just not very hungry." Megan exchanged a look with their mother, who frowned with concern. "You're getting too thin, honey. You need to eat properly." Claire nodded but said nothing. It was still too early to tell them about the pregnancy. She and Brian had decided to wait until she was 3 months along. Only a few more weeks to go. She could hold out. But it was during dessert, while Celia was serving cheesecake, that Claire noticed something that made her stomach turn. Megan stood up, saying she was going to the bathroom. Less than a minute later, Brian also stood up, saying he was going to get more ice from the kitchen. Claire froze, watching them both disappear, each in a different direction. Walter continued telling stories. Phil laughed. Celia cut the cheesecake. Everything was normal. Everything was as it always was. But Claire couldn't take her eyes off the hallway. She waited. 1 minute, 2, 3. Brian didn't come back. Megan didn't come back. She felt her breathing quicken, her heart pound. Her hands started to shake. "Claire?" Her mother's voice brought her back. "Do you want some cheesecake, honey?" She blinked, forcing herself back to the present. "Yes, Mom, thanks." She took the plate but couldn't eat. She just stared at the kitchen door, waiting for Brian to appear. When he finally returned carrying the ice bucket, he seemed calm, unconcerned. Less than a minute later, Megan also returned, fixing her hair. Claire watched them. Brian put the ice on the table. Megan went back to her seat. They didn't even look at each other. No exchange of glances, no secret smiles, nothing. But Claire knew. In that moment, With the cold, sharp certainty that only a woman's intuition can bring, she just knew. Something was happening, something wrong, something she had to find out. Because the baby growing inside her deserved more than a life built on lies. The following weeks turned into a kind of silent game. Claire watched. Brian and Megan acted, and everything continued to seem normal. As if that house, that family, that world wasn't about to collapse. She woke up every morning hoping it was all just paranoia, that the pregnancy hormones were truly distorting her perception of reality. But with each passing day, with every small detail that didn't add up, that hope dwindled a little more. Claire started paying attention to things that had previously gone unnoticed. Brian's phone, which he always used to leave on the table, now lived in his pocket. He checked it constantly with that quick, discreet motion of someone who doesn't want to be seen. When it rang, he would walk away to answer, going into the bedroom or out onto the balcony, always with the excuse that it was work and he needed a quiet space. Once, the phone buzzed while he was in the shower. Claire looked at the device on the bed, feeling that terrible temptation to pick it up, to look, to confirm or deny everything her mind had been constructing. But she couldn't. There was still a part of her that refused to cross that line. There was still a part of her that wanted to believe. The baby was growing. At the 8-week appointment, the doctor showed her the ultrasound and Claire saw a more defined shape. Tiny little arms, legs starting to form, the heart beating strong and fast. She cried again, but this time the tears carried something more than joy. They carried fear. They carried the anguish of not knowing if this child would grow up in a whole or a broken home. Brian was by her side at the appointment, holding her hand, asking the doctor all the right questions. He seemed like the perfect husband, the dedicated father-to-be. And maybe he was all of that. Maybe Claire was going crazy. Maybe the pregnancy had awakened an insecurity in her that didn't exist before. But then Megan called. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Claire was at home, working on a renovation project for a client in Cherry Hills Village. Brian had left for a meeting downtown, or at least that's what he had said. Claire's phone rang and her sister's name appeared on the screen. "Hey, sis." Megan's voice sounded strangely cheerful. "Are you home?" "I am. Why?" "I'm in the neighborhood. I'm gonna pop up for a minute, okay? I bought you some things." Claire felt a strange knot in her stomach. Megan never called to say she was coming over. She just showed up. Why was this time different? "Okay, I'm here." Less than 15 minutes later, the doorbell rang. Claire opened the door to find Megan with a paper bag in her hand, smiling in that way Claire had known forever. The same smile she saw in the mirror. The same smile that now seemed to carry something hidden. "Brought you some warm bagels from the bakery and that fresh squeezed orange juice you love." "Thanks." Claire took the bag and stepped aside, letting Megan in. "You didn't have to bring anything, you know." "I know, but I wanted to." Megan walked past her into the living room, looking around as if searching for something. "Brian's not here? He's in a meeting." "Oh." Megan nodded, but there was something in her tone, something Claire couldn't decipher. Her sister walked over to the balcony and stood there, looking at the view. The silence between them was strange. There had never been strange silences between them. They always had something to talk about. They always had easy laughs, but now, in that sunny afternoon condo, the silence was as heavy as lead. Megan turned around. "Are you okay? You look tired." "I'm just swamped with work." "Is that all?" Claire hesitated. There was something in the way Megan was looking at her, as if she were testing her, as if she wanted to know how much Claire knew, or how much she didn't. "Why are you asking me that?" Megan shrugged, trying to look casual, but Claire knew her sister too well. She knew every expression, every nervous tick. And right now, Megan was nervous. "I don't know, I feel like you've been different with me. More distant." Claire crossed her arms, feeling the baby inside her like a constant reminder of what was at stake. "I'm pregnant, Megan." The sentence came out before she could think. This wasn't how she wanted to tell her. This wasn't the planned moment. But the words just escaped, loaded with all the tension she had been accumulating. Megan's eyes widened. "What?" I'm pregnant. 8 weeks. Brian and I were going to wait to tell people, but since you're asking what's different about me, that's it. I'm pregnant and terrified and confused, and I don't know what to think about anything anymore." Megan stood there processing. Then slowly a smile began to form on her face, a smile that seemed genuine, but Claire no longer knew what was genuine and what was a mask. "Sis, that's wonderful." Megan crossed the room and hugged Claire, squeezing her tightly. "I'm so happy for you. So happy." Claire returned the hug, but her body was stiff. When Megan pulled away, there were tears in her eyes. Tears that looked real, but Claire didn't know what to believe anymore. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? I wanted to wait to make sure everything was okay." "And is it? Is everything okay?" Claire looked at her sister, really looked. She searched those eyes for any sign of guilt, of betrayal, of something that would confirm her suspicions, but all she saw was concern. Or maybe that's what Megan wanted her to see. "It is, the baby's fine. And you?" The question hung in the air. Claire didn't answer. Megan seemed to understand there was something more, something unsaid, but she didn't press. She just nodded, picked up her purse and said she had to go. Work piling up, projects with tight deadlines, the usual excuses. When the door closed, Claire was left alone in the living room, staring at the bag of bagels Megan had brought. She took one out, took a bite. It was good, warm, made with care, made with love perhaps, or with guilt. She no longer knew the difference. That night Brian came home late. It was after 10 when he walked into the condo, apologizing for the delay. The meeting ran long, then he had to solve a problem with a client. The traffic was horrible. The excuses came easily, naturally. Claire just nodded, serving the dinner she had prepared. They ate in silence. Brian tried to start a conversation a few times, asking about her day, about her work, but Claire answered in monosyllables. Finally, while she was washing the dishes, Brian came up behind her and hugged her, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Are you mad at me?" "I'm not mad." "Then what is it?" Claire turned off the faucet, dried her hands, and turned to face him. Brian was looking at her with those green eyes she had always loved, eyes that seemed sincere. But she needed to know. She had to ask. Megan came by. "Her today." "She did?" Brian seemed genuinely surprised. "She didn't tell me." "I told her about the pregnancy." Brian's face lit up. "You did? And what did she say?" "She was happy." "That's great." Brian smiled, kissing Claire's forehead. "I knew she would be. She loves you, honey. She's your sister." "I know." Claire looked away. "I just thought it was weird she came by without calling. She's been coming here a lot lately." "She's your sister," Brian repeated, as if that explained everything. "It's normal for her to want to be close to you, especially now with the baby on the way." The answer was logical, reasonable, but Claire still felt that something was wrong. Something didn't fit. She let the subject drop and went to the bedroom. Brian followed her, but she pretended to be too tired to talk. She lay on her side, her back to him, and stared at the wall until she felt his breathing become regular and deep. Only then did she allow the tears to flow silently down her face. The weekend arrived, and with it, a BBQ at Phil and Megan's house in a gated community in Highlands Ranch. It was a beautiful, 2-story house with a spacious backyard where Phil kept a brick BBQ pit he had built himself. They had invited a few friends, plus Claire's parents. It was supposed to be a relaxed afternoon of socializing, with cold beer and good food. Claire didn't want to go, but Brian insisted. It would be weird if they turned down the invitation. People would ask questions, they would be offended. So she agreed, put on a light cotton dress, and went. When they arrived, Phil was already at the grill, cooking brisket and brats. He greeted Brian with a firm handshake and hugged Claire warmly. "How's it going, sis-in-law?" "I'm good. A little tired, but good." "Working too much, huh? You need to rest more." Claire forced a smile and went inside. Megan was in the kitchen preparing salads. When she saw her sister, she dropped everything and came to hug her with that effusive way she always had. I'm so glad you guys came. I'm so happy. Thanks for inviting us. The other guests started arriving. A couple who were friends with Phil, two of Megan's co-workers. The conversation flowed, laughter echoed through the backyard. Claire sat in a plastic chair, under the shade of a tree, observing. Brian was talking to Phil near the grill. Megan circulated among the guests, offering drinks, laughing, being the perfect hostess. Everything seemed normal. Everything seemed as it always was. But Claire was paying attention, watching every move, every glance, every word. And that's when it happened. Brian said he was going to the bathroom. He went inside the house. Less than 2 minutes later, Megan said she was going to get more ice. She also went inside. Claire's heart pounded. She looked around. No one else seemed to have noticed. Phil was focused on the meat. The guests were chatting among themselves. Celia and Walter were absorbed in a discussion about renovating their kitchen. Claire stood up, slowly. She went inside the house. The hallway was empty. She heard voices coming from the back, near the pantry. Low voices, whispers. She walked toward the sound, her heart hammering in her chest. She stopped before turning the corner. She stood there, leaning against the wall, listening. You have to be careful. It was Megan's voice, tense. She's suspicious. I know. Brian's voice. I'm being careful. It's not enough. She was asking me questions the other day. She knows something's wrong. She doesn't know anything. She's just paranoid because of the pregnancy. A pause. Claire held her breath. What if she finds out? She won't. We just need to be smarter, more discreet. I don't know if I can keep doing this, Brian. She's my sister. Then it was Brian's voice that grew harsher. You should have thought of that before. Another silence. Claire felt her legs give way. She had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. Everything started to spin. The hallway, the walls, the entire world. She was right. Her intuition was right. And now she had confirmation. When she heard footsteps approaching, Claire quickly retreated, heading back to the backyard. She sat down in the same chair, picked up a glass of water that was on the table, and tried to control her breathing. Brian came out of the house first, rejoining the group by the grill as if nothing had happened. Megan appeared shortly after, carrying a bowl of ice, smiling at the guests. Claire sat there, motionless, the glass of water trembling in her hand. She wanted to scream. She wanted to get up and confront them, both in front of everyone. She wanted to expose their charade, but she couldn't move. The pain was so immense, so overwhelming, that it paralyzed her every muscle. She placed a hand on her belly, feeling the baby inside. Still so small, still so fragile, and already witnessing somehow the destruction of the world around it. Claire. She looked up. Celia was standing in front of her, looking concerned. Are you okay, honey? You're so pale. I'm not feeling well. Claire stood up, holding onto the back of the chair. I think I need to go home. Should I get Brian? No. Claire gripped her mother's arm tightly. Don't get him. I just need to lie down for a bit. It must be the heat. Celia nodded, but the worry remained on her face. She called Brian over anyway, telling him his wife wasn't feeling well. Brian came running, all solicitude, asking what had happened, if she wanted to go to the hospital, if the baby was okay. Claire looked at him, at the man she had loved since she was 22, at the man she married with whom she vowed to spend her life, at the man who was now cheating on her with her own sister. I'm just tired. Let's go home. They said their goodbyes quickly. Megan hugged Claire, holding her for a few seconds longer than necessary. Take care of yourself, sis, she said. Call me if you need anything. Claire didn't answer. She just got in the car, buckled her seatbelt, and stared out the window for the entire ride back. Brian tried to make conversation a few times, but she didn't respond. When they got home, she went straight to the bedroom, locked herself in the bathroom and threw up. She didn't know if it was morning sickness or disgust at everything she had just discovered. When she finally came out, Brian was sitting on the bed, waiting. Honey, you need to tell me what's going on. I'm worried. Claire faced him. This was the moment. She could confront him now. She could throw everything she'd heard in his face. She could end this farce once and for all. But something stopped her. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the baby. Or maybe it was just self-preservation, telling her she needed more information, more proof before she took the next step. "I'm just tired, Brian, so tired." He didn't push. He just nodded, kissed her forehead, and said he would let her rest. He left the room, closing the door gently behind him. Claire lay down on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The tears returned, silent and hot, streaming down her temples and soaking the pillow. She placed her hands on her belly, where her child was growing, oblivious to all the chaos. "I'm going to protect you," she whispered to the baby. "No matter what happens, I will protect you." And in that moment, lying in the dark, Claire made a decision. She wasn't just going to find out the truth. She was going to make them both pay for what they were doing. She was going to make sure everyone knew. She was going to destroy their lie with the same force they were using to destroy her heart. But for that, she needed proof, undeniable proof, and she knew exactly how to get it. The following week was one of the hardest of Claire's life. She had to pretend everything was normal while she planned her next steps. She had to smile at Brian when he asked how she was. She had to answer Megan's texts, which kept coming every day, full of heart emojis and questions about the baby. Claire scheduled a work trip. She told Brian she needed to go to Chicago for 2 days to close a big contract with an important client. It was a lie. She wasn't going anywhere. But she needed Brian to believe it. She needed him to think he would have the condo to himself, unwatched, with no risk of being caught. "Are you sure?" Brian asked, concerned. "Isn't it too tiring to travel right now?" "I have to." "Close this deal. It's important for the firm." He nodded, but Claire saw a glint in his eye, a glint that confirmed her suspicions. He was relieved. He was eager for her to leave. The trip was scheduled for a Thursday. On Wednesday night, Claire packed a small suitcase with some clothes and documents to make it all more convincing. Brian helped her, being attentive, saying he would miss her. "Be careful, okay? And call me when you get there." "I will." On Thursday morning, Claire left the house at 7, carrying the suitcase, waving to Brian, who was on the balcony. She got in her car, started the engine, and headed toward the bus station as if she were really going to catch a bus. But 3 blocks later, she parked on a side street, took her suitcase, and walked to a small hotel nearby, where she checked in under a fake name. She left the suitcase in the room and went back to her car. She drove back to her neighborhood but parked 2 blocks down from her building. She walked to the adjacent building and waited in a spot where she could see the entrance to her own. She was wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses, trying not to be recognized. She waited. 1 hour, 2 hours. The sun climbed higher in the sky. People passed by, going to work, walking their dogs. Life went on as normal for everyone, except for her. And then she saw it. It was almost 10 in the morning when Megan appeared. Claire recognized her immediately, even from a distance. Her sister was wearing a floral dress, her hair down, a large purse slung over her shoulder. She looked around discreetly before entering the building. Claire felt the air catch in her throat. There it was, the confirmation she had been dreading. Megan had a key. Megan was walking into the condo as if it were her own home, because in a way, it had become one. She waited a few more minutes, her heart hammering so hard it felt like it would explode. Then she picked up her phone and called Phil. "Hello?" Her brother-in-law's voice sounded surprised. "Claire?" "Hi, Phil. Sorry to call you out of the blue. I have a problem here at the condo." "A problem? What kind of problem?" "The storage room door is jammed. Brian is stuck inside and I can't get it open. Can you come help me?" There was a pause. "Sure. I'm off today anyway. I'll be there in 20 minutes. "Thanks, Phil. Thank you so much." She hung up. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped the phone. She waited another 15 minutes before heading back to her building. She rode the elevator up, her heart racing. When she reached her front door, she took a deep breath. She put the key in the lock carefully, turning it slowly so as not to make a sound. She opened the door. The house was silent, seemingly empty. But Claire knew where to look. She walked through the rooms, past the living room, the kitchen. Everything was tidy, everything in its place. She went to the back, where the storage room was, the space they had once thought of turning into a nursery. The door was closed, but there was a sliver of light underneath it, and voices, low, whispered, and other sounds, sounds that confirmed everything. Claire felt something inside her break. It wasn't pain anymore, it was rage, pure and crystalline. With mechanical movements, she grabbed the heavy padlock that was kept in the laundry room. She went back to the storage room. She snapped the padlock onto the external latch and closed it with a dull click. Inside, there was a moment of silence, then movement, a confused voice. Brian. "Honey? You're back?" Claire didn't answer. She went to the hallway and flipped the circuit breaker for the storage room. The light went out. The space heater stopped. From inside, the screaming began. The screams continued. Brian was pounding on the door, his voice growing more desperate. "Claire, for God's sake, open this door. What are you doing?" Megan was screaming too, but her voice was different. It was filled with panic. Pure panic. Because Megan knew exactly what was happening. She knew this was the moment everything fell apart. Claire stood in the hallway, staring at the locked door. Her ears caught every word, every plea, every pathetic attempt at an excuse coming from the other side. But she felt no pity. She felt nothing but the cold, calculated rage that had taken over her entire being. She placed a hand on her belly, feeling the tiny being growing inside, and thought, "My child will never know. These people. He will never grow up believing that betrayal is normal, that lying is acceptable, that family is disposable." The doorbell rang. Phil. Claire went to the door and opened it. Her brother-in-law was standing there, wearing a Denver Broncos t-shirt and jean shorts, a confused look on his face. He was a good-natured man with an easy smile, who worked too hard and trusted the people he loved. Claire looked at him and felt a pang of compassion. Phil didn't deserve this, just like she didn't. "Hey, Claire, I thought you were in Chicago." "Change of plans." She stepped aside, letting him in. "Sorry to call you over like this." "Don't worry about it, but what happened? You said Brian was stuck in the storage room?" "He is." Claire closed the door behind him. "Come with me." She led him through the condo. Phil followed, still not fully understanding the situation. As they passed the kitchen, he commented casually, just making conversation. "Megan left early today. Said she was going to help you with some baby stuff. She's probably out shopping somewhere, you know how she is." Claire didn't respond, she just kept walking until they reached the back hallway. The screams from the storage room had subsided but were still audible, muffled, desperate voices. Phil stopped. He frowned. "There are people yelling in there." "There are?" Claire turned to face him, holding the key to the padlock in her hand. "Phil, I need you to be prepared for what you're about to see when I open this door." His expression changed. Confusion gave way to concern. "What are you talking about?" "Just be prepared." She held the key out to him. Phil took it, still looking at Claire as if expecting some further explanation, but Claire just pointed to the door. "You can open it." Phil took a few steps toward the storage room. The pounding from the other side had started again. Brian was yelling, "Claire, please, this isn't what you think." And another voice, a woman's, desperate, a voice Phil would recognize anywhere. He stopped. He turned to Claire, his eyes wide. "That's Megan's voice." "It is." Claire kept her voice steady, despite the trembling she felt inside. "Open the door, Phil." He hesitated for another second before putting the key in the padlock. He turned it. The metal groaned. The lock sprang open. Phil pulled the door open forcefully, and the light from the hallway flooded the dark space of the storage room. And there they were, Brian and Megan. On top of the blanket, Claire and Brian had received as a wedding gift. The light blue blanket that was usually on their bed, that kept them warm on cold Denver winter nights. Their clothes were disheveled. Megan's blouse was crooked, the buttons undone. Brian's shirt was untucked. They were both blinking against the sudden light, their faces a mixture of shock, fear, and something that could be mistaken for shame, if shame still existed in either of them. Megan was the first to react. She scrambled to her feet, pulling her blouse together to cover herself, stumbling over her own legs. "Phil." She reached a hand toward her husband. "Phil, I can explain." But Phil didn't move. He was paralyzed, staring at the scene before him as if he couldn't process what he was seeing. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He just stood there, frozen in the doorway, clutching the key to the padlock as if it were the last solid thing in a world that had just crumbled. Brian also tried to get up, hastily adjusting his clothes. "Claire, honey." He took a step toward her, but Claire immediately backed away, holding up a hand to stop him. "Don't come near me." Her voice was low, but filled with an authority that made Brian freeze in place. "Don't you dare take another step in my direction." Megan started to cry. Desperate tears, loud, dramatic sobs. "Sis, please, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. This shouldn't have happened. I never wanted to hurt you." Claire looked at her sister, at the woman with whom she had shared a childhood, teenage years, secrets, dreams, at the person she considered her best friend, and she felt nothing. No compassion, no desire to hear excuses. Just a vast emptiness where love used to be. "How many times?" Claire asked, her voice as sharp as glass. "How many times have you done this?" Megan shook her head, still crying. "It doesn't matter, that doesn't matter." "Yes, it does." Claire took a step forward, her eyes fixed on her sister's. "How many times did you have sex in my house? In my bed, in my storage room while I was pregnant with his child? Brian tried to intervene. "Claire, stop, you're upset. Let's talk about this calmly." "Calmly?" Claire laughed, a humorless, cutting laugh. "You want me to be calm, after finding out my husband is having an affair with my sister, after hearing the two of you planning how to better deceive me?" Phil finally moved. He turned to Megan, his voice trembling. You were having an affair with Brian." Megan reached for her husband, desperate. "Phil, please, let me explain. It just started. It was an accident. One thing led to another and—" "An accident?" Phil cut her off, his voice rising. "You slipped and fell on his dick by accident." The silence that followed was deafening. Claire had never heard Phil speak like that. He was always calm, level-headed, the type to avoid confrontation. But now something in him was broken. Something that would never be fixed. Brian tried a different approach. He turned to Claire, his voice taking on an almost pathetic tone. "Honey, I love you. You know I love you. This thing with Megan means nothing. It was a moment of weakness, a mistake, but our marriage, our son, that's what's real, that's what matters." Claire felt bile rise in her throat. "You don't love me. If you did, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have slept with my sister. You wouldn't have lied to me every single day. You wouldn't have schemed for ways to keep deceiving me." "But the baby," Brian pointed to her belly. "Think about our son. He needs a father. He needs a family." And Claire felt something shift inside her, an absolute clarity, an unshakable certainty. "My son needs a lot of things. He needs love, security, truth. But he doesn't need you. He never needed you." Brian tried to take another step, but Claire didn't back down this time. She stood her ground, looking directly into his eyes. "You have 30 minutes to pack your things and get out of my house. If you're not gone, I'm calling the police." "You can't kick me out. This is my house too." "No, it's not." Claire crossed her arms. "This condo is in my name. I bought it with my grandmother's inheritance money years before we got married. You have no legal claim to it, so pack your things and go." Brian stared at her, incredulous. "You can't do this." "I can and I will. And if you try to fight it, I have proof, photos, text messages, Phil's testimony. The building's entry logs showing every time she came in here using the key I gave her. You'll lose everything, so you'd better leave now while you still have some dignity left." Megan tried to approach Claire, but Phil grabbed her by the arm. "No," he said, his voice hard. "You don't touch her, ever again." Megan turned to her husband, her face wet with tears. "Phil, please, listen to me." "I have nothing to listen to." Phil let her go, taking a step back as if her touch burned him. "You destroyed everything. Everything we built. Why? Was I not a good husband? Didn't I give you everything you wanted? It's not about that. Then what is it about? Megan didn't answer. She just kept crying, looking around as if searching for an escape that didn't exist. Phil shook his head, a gesture of defeat, and turned to Claire. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice broken. "I'm sorry for all of this. You didn't deserve it. Neither of us did." Claire touched his arm briefly. "But now we know who they really are." Phil nodded. He looked one last time at Megan, at the woman he had been married to for 5 years, and Claire saw the exact moment something died in his eyes. When he walked out of the condo, he didn't look back. Brian still tried to argue. He talked about the pregnancy, about their 7 years of marriage, about how much they had invested together in building this life. But Claire was resolute. She called the front desk and asked for security to come up, saying she needed witnesses. Brian realized he was losing the battle. He grabbed some clothes from the closet, documents from a drawer, his laptop. All in silence while Claire watched him from the bedroom doorway, her arms still crossed, her expression unreadable. Before he left, he stopped at the door. "You're going to regret this." "No, I won't. The only thing I regret is ever trusting you." He slammed the door on his way out. The sound echoed through the empty condo. Claire stood there, listening to his footsteps fade away, the elevator descending. Only then, when she was absolutely sure she was alone, did she allow her legs to give out. She sank to the floor, leaning against the wall, and finally cried. She cried for everything she had lost, for the marriage that was over, for the sister she could never look at again, for the family that had been shattered. But she also cried with relief, because now she knew the truth, because she no longer had to pretend, because she could finally start rebuilding her life on a foundation of truth. Megan tried to call dozens of times that night. Claire blocked her number. She tried to send messages through other apps. Claire didn't respond. She showed up at the condo the next day, knocking insistently, begging her sister to listen. Claire called building security and had her removed. "I don't want to see her. I don't want to hear anything she has to say." Brian also tried to make contact. Calls, texts, even flowers sent with cards begging for forgiveness. Claire threw it all in the trash without reading. She called a lawyer the next day and started the divorce proceedings. She gathered all the evidence she had. Screenshots of messages she found on Brian's computer. Condo security logs showing all the times Megan entered using the emergency key. Phil's testimony as he agreed to be a witness for Claire. Photos of the storage room with the blanket, exactly as she had found it. The lawyer listened to her in silence, taking notes. When Claire finished, he took off his glasses and sighed. "You have a strong case. Very strong. With this evidence, there's no way he can contest custody of the child or claim any assets that are in your name." "I want him completely out of my life," Claire said, her voice firm. "I don't want alimony. I don't want anything from him. I just want him to sign the papers and disappear." "And what about visitation rights?" Claire thought for a moment. She placed a hand on her belly, where the baby continued to grow, oblivious to the chaos. "We'll decide that later, after the child is born. For now, I just want peace." The divorce was quick. Brian tried to contest it at first, claiming Claire was emotionally unstable due to the pregnancy, that she was making rash decisions. But when his lawyer saw all the evidence, he advised him to accept the terms. "There's no point in fighting this. You'll lose, and you'll come out of it looking even worse." Brian signed the papers on a Tuesday afternoon at the lawyer's office. Claire wasn't present. She didn't want to see him. The 7-year marriage was dissolved in less than 3 months. All that remained were signed papers and a shattered life. Telling her parents was one of the hardest parts. Claire scheduled a lunch at their house on a Saturday and brought Phil along for support. Celia and Walter listened to the whole story in absolute shock. Her mother started crying before Claire even finished. Her father sat in silence, his face red, his hands clenched into fists on the table. "Megan did this," Celia kept repeating, shaking her head. "Our Megan? With Brian? With her own sister's husband?" "She did," Claire confirmed, her voice devoid of emotion. "For months, in my house, while I was pregnant." Walter stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair. "I'm going to her house right now. I'm going to tell her exactly what I think of that. Dad, no. Claire grabbed his arm. Let it go. She already knows what she did. Everyone knows. But it was true that not everyone knew yet. In the following days, Celia and Walter made sure to tell the entire extended family. Aunts, uncles, cousins, close friends. Everyone found out. Megan became persona non grata. No one answered her calls. No one replied to her messages. She was removed from the family group chat. Her name became synonymous with betrayal, with dishonor. Phil also got divorced. His process was even faster than Claire's. He had no children with Megan, no shared assets. He just signed the papers, and it was done. Claire learned through her parents that Megan had tried to stop the divorce, begged Phil to forgive her, promised she would never do it again, that it had been a terrible mistake, that she loved him. But Phil was resolute. He said only one thing to Megan before signing the divorce papers. You broke the one thing I asked of you when we got married, loyalty, and without that there's no marriage, there's nothing. Megan tried to reach out to Claire several times in the following months. She sent letters. One arrived when Claire was 4 months pregnant. It was a long letter, full of apologies, of convoluted explanations about how it all started. How it was a moment of weakness. How she never wanted to hurt her sister. How sorry she was. How she needed Claire's forgiveness to move on. Claire read only the first few lines before tearing the letter up and throwing it in the trash. It wasn't hatred. It wasn't revenge. It was just a cold, clear realization. Megan didn't deserve her forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe never. Another letter arrived when Claire was 6 months along. This time she didn't even open it. She just put it in the building's incinerator and went on with her life, because that's what it was about now. Moving on. Rebuilding. The condo that was once a home full of lies was being transformed. Claire hired a renovation crew. She changed the furniture, painted the walls, and the storage room, the space that had witnessed the betrayal, she transformed completely. She cleaned everything out, ripped up the old flooring, painted the walls a bright, sunny yellow. She installed shelves, a desk, a comfortable chair. She turned that place into a studio, a creative space where she could draw, plan her architectural projects and dream of the future. The first time she walked into the finished studio, Claire stood in the middle of the room looking around. Here, in the very space where she had discovered the worst betrayal of her life, there was now light. There was color. There was possibility. She placed a hand on her belly, now large and round. The baby kicked, a strong movement that made her smile. "See?" she whispered. "We can turn even the worst things into something beautiful. It's just a matter of choosing not to let the pain win." The belly grew. The baby developed. Claire went to her appointments alone now, but she didn't feel lonely. Her parents always offered to go with her. Phil, who had become a close friend after everything, also offered when he was in town. They met for coffee sometimes, two survivors of the same storm, trying to build new safe harbors. "How are you doing?" Phil always asked. "Better," Claire would reply. And it was true. With each passing day she felt a little stronger, a little more whole. Brian tried to get in touch when he heard through mutual acquaintances that Claire was close to her due date. He sent a message saying he wanted to be there, that he had a right to meet his child. Claire responded through her lawyer. "When the child is born, we will establish the terms of visitation. For now, keep your distance." He didn't try again. Megan also found out about the impending birth. She sent one last letter. This time Claire opened it. She read it to the end. It was more of the same. Apologies. Regret. Pleas for forgiveness. At the end, Megan wrote, "I know I don't deserve it, but I love you. I always have. You're my sister, and I destroyed everything. I'll have to live with that for the rest of my life." Claire folded the letter, put it in a drawer, and never thought about it again. The baby was born on an October morning, when Denver was vibrant with the golden aspen trees scattered across the city. It was a smooth, though long, delivery. Celia was in the waiting room, Walter too. When the nurse brought the baby wrapped in a blue blanket, Claire held him in her arms and felt that everything, absolutely everything she had been through, was worth it. It was a boy. He had his father's green eyes, but his face was all hers. She named him David, a name she had always loved, a name that meant beloved, because this boy would be loved, unconditionally, truly. When she brought David home, to the renovated condo, to the nursery she had decorated herself, Claire felt a peace she hadn't felt in months. She placed her son in his crib, stood watching him sleep, and thought about everything she had lost, her husband, her sister, the family she had imagined building. But she also thought about everything she had gained, the truth, her dignity, her self-worth, and this tiny little being sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the chaos that preceded him, but who would grow up surrounded by honesty and respect. Claire leaned against the doorframe, watching her son, and smiled. A small but genuine smile. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't just surviving, she was living. 2 years later, Claire was sitting in a cafe in Cherry Creek, watching the street life through the window. It was a warm March afternoon, the kind where Denver showed off why it was called the Mile High City, with its leafy trees casting shade on the sidewalks. David was at preschool under the watchful care of teachers Claire had chosen meticulously. In a few hours she would pick him up, and they would return home to the routine they had built together. A simple dinner, a bath with plastic toys, a story before bed. A small life, perhaps, to an outsider. But it was a true life, and that made all the difference. Claire's phone vibrated. It was a text from Julia, one of the women from the support group she coordinated. Julia was going through a complicated divorce, having discovered her husband had a second family in another state. The message was short. "I did it. Signed the papers today. I'm free." Claire smiled and typed back quickly, "Congratulations, you were so brave. See you at the meeting on Thursday." The support group was born almost by accident. 6 months after David was born, Claire was at a routine checkup when she saw a woman in the waiting room crying quietly, trying to hide her face behind a magazine. Claire recognized that cry. It was the cry of someone who had just discovered their life was a lie. She sat down next to the woman, and after a few minutes of respectful silence, asked if she was okay. The woman looked at Claire with red-rimmed eyes and said, "I found out my husband is having an affair. For 3 years, with a co-worker of his." And Claire replied, with the calm of someone who had already walked through that hell and come out the other side, "I went through that too. And I survived. You will too." They talked for almost an hour in that waiting room, completely forgetting about their appointments. The woman, whose name was Regina, poured everything out. The discovery, the pain, the fear of the future. Claire listened, shared her own story, and offered what she could: solidarity, understanding, and living proof that it was possible to rebuild. When they parted, Regina asked if they could meet again. Claire said yes. They scheduled a coffee date. On the agreed day, Regina showed up with another woman, a friend who was also dealing with betrayal. Claire didn't mind. The more, the merrier. Others joined. Referrals from referrals. Women who needed a safe space to share their pain, their anxieties, their small victories. The group grew organically until Claire decided to make it official. She rented a small room in a community center in the Capitol Hill neighborhood. She started promoting the meetings on social media. She gave it a name, Rebuild, because that's what it was about. Not revenge, not hatred, but rebuilding oneself on a solid foundation. The meetings took place every Thursday night. There were always between 10 and 15 women sitting in a circle, sharing their stories. Claire wasn't a therapist. She made that clear from the start. She was just a woman who had been through the same thing and wanted to help. The group had simple rules: no judgment, absolute confidentiality, and a focus on personal reconstruction, not the destruction of the other person. Some stories were devastating. Women betrayed by husbands who had sworn eternal love, women who discovered parallel families, women deceived for years on end, women who lost not only their partners, but also friends, homes, and financial stability. Claire listened to them all with the same attention, offering what she had learned on her own journey, that the pain was valid, that the anger was understandable, but that neither should define the rest of their lives. At one of the meetings, a woman named Patricia, who had discovered her husband was cheating on her with his own cousin, asked, "How did you manage to forgive?" Claire thought before answering. "I didn't, at least not in the way people expect. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting or accepting what they did. It means deciding that it will no longer have power over me. It means choosing my peace of mind over the anger I could hold on to forever." "But don't you feel angry?" "I do, sometimes. But I learned that anger is like poison. If I keep drinking it every day, I'm the one who dies. They've already taken enough of my life. I'm not giving them another minute." The work with the group gave Claire a sense of purpose. She still worked as an architect, still had her projects and clients, but the group became something bigger. It became a mission. Seeing those women arrive broken and, week after week, piece themselves back together was gratifying in a way no architectural project could ever be. It was through the group that Claire started getting invitations to speak at events. First, they were small talks at community organizations, at churches. Then companies started calling her to speak about resilience, about rebuilding after loss, about emotional strength. Claire accepted when she could, always using her story as an example, but being careful not to turn it into a spectacle. It wasn't about her. It was about all the women who needed to hear that it was possible to overcome. At one of these talks, a conference on women's mental health in San Francisco, Claire told her full story in public for the first time. She spoke about the pregnancy, the discovery of the affair, the confrontation, the divorce. But she also spoke about what came after, about turning the storage room into a studio, about raising David alone, about the support group, about learning that her strength had never depended on having a man by her side. When she finished, the auditorium was silent. Then, slowly, one woman began to applaud, then another, and another, until everyone was on their feet applauding. Claire felt tears in her eyes, but they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of fulfillment, of knowing that her story, as painful as it had been, was helping other people. After the talk, dozens of women approached her, some just to say thank you, others to share their own stories. One of them, a white-haired lady who must have been in her 60s, hugged Claire and said, "I needed to hear this 30 years ago. I stayed in an unhappy marriage my whole life because I thought I had no choice, that I wasn't strong enough. Thank you for showing me it's possible to be different." Claire hugged the woman back, feeling the weight of those words. "It's never too late," she whispered. "It's never too late to choose yourself." Life with David was the center of everything. The boy was growing up fast, smart, and curious. He had his father's green eyes, but his personality was all his own. Talkative, affectionate, full of questions about everything. Why is the sky blue? Where do the ants go? How do buildings stay up? Claire answered with patience, sometimes using her architectural knowledge to explain complex concepts in simple terms. She created a solid routine. She woke up early, made breakfast, and took David to school. She worked during the day, either from her home office or visiting her project sites. She picked up her son in the late afternoon. They had dinner together, always at the kitchen table, talking about their day. "What did you learn today?" Claire would ask. And David would tell her about his school activities, his friends, his discoveries. At night, after his bath, came Claire's favorite time. She would lie in bed with David and read stories. Sometimes they were illustrated children's books. Other times they were stories she made up herself, about brave princes and kind dragons, about adventures in faraway lands. David would listen with wide eyes, asking questions, begging for one more. When her son finally fell asleep, Claire would spend a few minutes just watching him, that serene little face, the gentle breathing, and she would think about everything that almost wasn't. If she had stayed in that marriage, if she had accepted the excuses, if she had pretended nothing happened, David would have grown up in a house full of lies, learning that betrayal was acceptable, that dignity was negotiable. But no, she chose differently. And David would grow up knowing the value of truth, knowing his mother was strong enough to start over, knowing that love was not synonymous with submission. Brian tried to re-establish contact when David turned 1. He sent a message through his lawyer asking to set up regular visits. Claire agreed, but with conditions. The visits would be supervised at first. Brian couldn't take his son places without telling her, and most importantly, Megan could not be present at any time. The first few visits were tense. Brian would show up at the agreed time, pick up David for a few hours and take him to the park or the mall. He would bring the boy back in the late afternoon. He tried to make small talk with Claire, but she kept everything strictly professional. Hello and goodbye, nothing more. Over time, the visits became more natural. Brian seemed genuinely interested in being a father, even from a distance. He sent gifts on birthdays. He called to talk to David a few times a week. Claire allowed all of this because she understood that, regardless of what Brian had done to her, David had a right to know his father. But she never forgot. She never completely forgave. She just accepted that it was part of the past and that the present deserved her full attention. Megan was a different story. She never stopped trying. Letters continued to arrive over the 2 years, all similar, asking for forgiveness, explaining, justifying. Claire stopped reading them after the third one. She just kept the letters in a box in her closet, unopened. Maybe one day she would read them, maybe not. For now, she wasn't ready. And there was no rush. Celia would sometimes ask, "Don't you miss your sister?" "I miss the sister I thought she was," Claire would reply. "But that person doesn't exist. She never did. It was a fantasy I created in my head." Her mother would sigh, saddened. "She's my daughter too, you know. I can't just cast her aside." "I understand, Mom. And you don't have to. You can have whatever relationship you want with her. But I chose to step away, and you need to respect that." Celia respected it. She didn't talk about Megan in front of Claire. She didn't try to force a reconciliation. She just accepted that the two sisters had gone their separate ways. Walter had a different approach. He never spoke Megan's name again. If a family member asked about her, he would change the subject. For him, Megan ceased to exist the day she betrayed her sister. It was a kind of mourning. Mourning for the daughter he thought he knew. Phil remained a close friend. He rebuilt his life, started dating someone new, a physical education teacher who was completely different from Megan. Sweet, transparent, no games. Claire met them for dinner and approved immediately. Phil deserved to be happy. He deserved someone who valued him. Sometimes when they were having coffee, Phil would ask, "Don't you ever think about dating again?" "I do," Claire would admit. "But I'm in no hurry. I'm happy on my own. I'm building something solid first. When someone comes along, I want to be sure it's because I want them, not because I need them." And he understood, because he was doing the same thing, rebuilding slowly, carefully, without rushing. Claire's architecture firm grew. She hired an assistant, then an intern. The projects got bigger, more ambitious. Full home renovations, corporate interior design projects, even consulting for a small real estate development. Her name started to circulate in Denver's professional circles. Claire, the architect who transformed spaces, who had a special eye for renewal. She would laugh when she heard that. If only they knew my specialty came from having to renew my own life. But it was. True, Claire had a special talent for taking broken spaces and turning them into something beautiful, maybe because she had done the same thing to herself. She took the shattered pieces of her life and built something new, something stronger. One Saturday morning, almost 3 years after the divorce, Claire was in her studio working on a project when David ran in. "Mummy, there's a lady at the door." Claire frowned. She wasn't expecting anyone. She went to the door, and when she opened it, her heart stopped for a second. It was Megan. Her sister looked different. Thinner, her. Hair shorter, deep dark circles under her eyes. She was wearing simple clothes, jeans and a white t-shirt. None of the vibrant style she always had. She seemed smaller somehow, diminished. "Hi," Megan said, her voice trembling. "I know I shouldn't be here, but I had to try one more time." Claire stood in the doorway, blocking the entrance. She said nothing, just waited. "I moved," Megan continued. "I'm living in Colorado Springs. I got a job there. I'm trying to start over." "Good for you." "I wanted to tell you in person, not in a letter, that I'm sorry. More than words can say. I destroyed everything. I destroyed us. I destroyed our family. And I know there's no going back. I know you'll never forgive me. But I needed you to know that I spend every single day of my life regretting it." Claire looked at her sister, at the woman who was once her best friend. She felt a pang of something. It wasn't anger, it wasn't hatred. Maybe it was sadness. Sadness for what could have been and never would be. "I believe you're sorry," Claire said finally, "but that doesn't change anything. You made your choices, I made mine, and my choice is to move on without you." Megan nodded, tears now streaming freely down her face. "I understand. I just wanted you to know that, despite everything, I always loved you. You were always the best person I ever knew. And I threw it all away." Claire felt David come up behind her, clutching her leg. The boy was looking curiously at the strange woman at the door. Megan noticed, and her face lit up for a brief second. "Is that David?" "It is. He's beautiful, he looks like you." Claire placed a protective hand on her son's head. Megan understood the gesture. She took a step back. "I'll go. I just wanted to see you one more time, to tell you in person." Megan hesitated, then pulled something from her pocket. An envelope. She placed it on the doormat. "These are pictures of us. From when we were kids, I thought maybe you'd want them, so David can know the family's history." Claire didn't pick up the envelope. She just watched as Megan turned and walked down the stairs. When her sister reached the sidewalk, she turned one last time. "I know I don't deserve it, but if one day, many years from now, you think you can hear me out, I'll be waiting. Forever if I have to." And then she was gone. Claire stood in the doorway, watching Megan's figure recede down the street until she disappeared around the corner. David tugged on her shirt. "Who was that lady, Mummy?" Claire looked down at her son, at those curious green eyes. She thought about how to answer. She thought about all the lies she could tell. But she decided on the truth. Always the truth. That was someone I knew long time ago. Someone who made bad choices and hurt a lot of people. Is she bad? It's not about being good or bad, my love. It's about making choices, and she made choices that had consequences. Understand? David thought for a moment, then nodded. "I think so." Claire picked up her son and closed the door. She saw the envelope still on the doormat. She thought about picking it up, but decided to leave it there. Maybe later, maybe never. For now, she had more important things to do. That night, after putting David to bed, Claire went out, onto the balcony, and looked out at the city. The lights of Denver twinkled in the darkness, thousands of lives happening simultaneously. Some happy, some sad, some in the middle of their own storms. She thought about everything she had been through, the pain of discovery, the humiliation of being caught, the strength she had to find to start over. She thought of Brian, who was now just her son's father, nothing more. She thought of Megan, living in another city, carrying the weight of her choices. She thought of all the women in her group, each fighting their own battles. And she thought of herself, of who she was 3 years ago and who she had become. The Claire of the past wouldn't have believed it if someone had told her she would survive this, that she would not only survive, but thrive, that she would find purpose in her pain, that she would help other women, that she would raise a son on her own and do it well, that she would become stronger in the very places she had been broken. Life had taught her something fundamental. You teach people how to treat you, and when decided that betrayal would not be tolerated, that lies would not be accepted, that her dignity was non-negotiable, everything changed. It wasn't easy. There were nights of crying, there were moments of doubt, there were days when waking up felt impossible, but she woke up, every single day, and slowly she rebuilt herself. Self-love, she discovered, wasn't something you either had or didn't have. It was something you cultivated, daily, in every small choice. Every time she said no to what no longer served her, every time she prioritized her peace of mind, every time she chose truth over convenience. And the consequences were real. Brian lost a family, Megan lost a sister, a husband, the trust of everyone. They would both have to live with that forever. Not because of Claire's revenge, but because of their own choices. Because actions have consequences, and dignity has a price. A price Claire was willing to pay, even when it hurt, even when it was hard, even when it meant being alone. But she wasn't alone. She had David. She had her parents. She had Phil, who had become a chosen brother. She had the women in her group. She had her career. She had her studio, that transformed space that symbolized everything she was capable of. Claire looked up at the sky. The stars were faint, dimmed by the city lights, but they were still there. She thought of the envelope Megan had left, the childhood photos, a version of them that no longer existed. Maybe one day she would look at those photos. Maybe one day she could separate the good memories from the bad. Maybe one day forgiveness would be possible. But it didn't have to be today, it didn't have to be tomorrow. She had the rest of her life to decide. For now, she was fine right where she was. Rebuilt, not perfect. Whole, not without scars, but alive. Truly alive. And that, Claire realized as she went back inside the condo, checked on David one last time, and got into her own bed, was more than enough. It was, in fact, everything. The following month, Claire received another invitation to speak. This time it was a bigger event in New York City, with hundreds of attendees. The theme was female resilience. She accepted. On the day of the talk, while she was backstage waiting for her turn to go on, she received a text from one of the women in her group. It read, "You changed my life. Before I met you, I thought I had to put up with everything to keep my family together. You showed me that I am the family, that I matter. Thank you." Claire smiled. She put her phone away and walked onto the stage. The lights were bright. The audience was large. She took a deep breath and began to speak. She told her story one more time. Not as a victim, but as a survivor. She spoke about the choices she made, about the price she paid, about what she gained in the process. She spoke about self-love, about dignity, about the importance of teaching people how to treat you. When she finished, there wasn't just applause. There were women crying. There were women laughing. There were women who saw themselves in her story and understood that they too could choose differently. One of them approached her afterward, a young woman no older than 25. She said she was in an abusive relationship and didn't know how to get out. Claire talked with her, gave her the contact. For the group offered her support. The girl left with her eyes shining, not with tears but with hope. And Claire understood that this was her purpose now, not to erase what happened, because that was impossible, but to use what she had learned to light the way for others. She returned to Denver the next day. She picked up David from her parents' house, where the boy had been under the loving care of his grandparents. He ran into her arms, excitedly telling her about all the things he had done. Claire hugged him tight, breathing in that little kid, smell that pure energy. They went home, they had dinner, they played, and when David finally fell asleep, Claire went to her studio. She turned on the light and looked around. The yellow walls, the shelves full of projects, the work table, the space that was born from the worst pain of her life. Claire sat in her chair and just stayed there, in silence, soaking in the peace of that moment. Nothing perfect, no traditional happy ending, just the reality of someone who had walked through fire and decided not to let the ashes define who she was. She was 35 years old. She had a wonderful son. She had a solid career. She had a purpose. She had peace. She had above all her dignity intact. And that was worth more than any fairy tale she had ever imagined, because it was real, because it was hers, because no one could ever take it away. Dear listeners, we hope Claire's story has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by her strength and courage, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment of the story resonated with you the most. What would you do in Claire's situation? How do you deal with betrayal in your own life? Share your experience, because your story can help others who are going through the same thing. Every day, we bring you intense and true narratives like this one, revealing the deepest side of the human soul. Stories about overcoming self-love and emotional justice. Remember, you teach people how to treat you, and your dignity is never negotiable. We'll see you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions.